No, I'm very glad and honored to have two writers with very rich both lives and work. Uh, Andrew lived here for around 7 years, married in India actually, and he was working with the BBC for many years. He's an historian, one of the associate editor of the History Workshop Journal, sorry. And we have Irène Frain, whose association with India goes back to her childhood almost, to the fish curry that has been adopted by people from Brittany, from Pondicherry, actually, from a recipe of Tamil fishermen or Tamil recipes,
Yes.
actually. And okay, so India played a very, very big role, of course, is constitutive to both their lives and their work. Irène has, among the many books, 40 books that Irène has written, quite few are set in India. We won't have time to go through the whole bibliography of both of them, but I think one of the most remarkable aspect in the latest work, which is from Andrew Whitehead, The Lives of Freda, the political, spiritual, and personal journey of Freda Bedi, and from Irène Frain, Je te suivrai en Sibérie, I'll follow you up in Siberia, is the amazing capacity of two women to break barriers, to break social barriers, to break religious barrier, to break, geographical barriers as well, because they are really travelers. And I think that's really a common feature to both their latest book. It's there in most of, actually, Irène's book, including those who are set in India, such as The Nabab, about Madeg, about Pulan Devi, of course, about the Bishnois, who are also breaking many barriers. But I think we'll keep the conversation focused on these two latest book of theirs, though maybe Irène will mention a little bit Pulan Devi because it's translated in English and available here. Now, we might start with Andrew first to give us, a short introduction on his work on the lives of Freda and, well, the many, many, many barriers she wrote. I would just make a small personal mention. I was very touched, for instance, to learn that Freda Bedi wrote a book on the Bengal famines, which have been only very recently rediscovered by historians. But that's one of the many fascinating aspects which you can read in the book. Andrew, to you.
Thanks, Samuel. Freda Bedi was a woman who refused to be constrained by traditional barriers of gender, race, religion, and nation. She was English. She was also Indian, and would have argued vociferously if anybody questioned her Indian identity. I imagine most of you have not heard of her. I promise all of you will have heard of her son. So one of her 4 children is Kabir Bedi, the actor. If you want to know where he got his good looks from, it was from his mother. I'm not kidding you. I mean, you look at the photo. I mean, Freda was wonderfully photogenic, blue-eyed, fair hair. Her story captured my interest because of actually analogies with my own. I mean, you can take that to a certain place, but not beyond. She grew up not all that far from me, in Derby, from a non-privileged background. She broke one barrier in getting to Oxford University as a provincial middle-class girl in the early 1930s. There she broke another because she had a Punjabi fellow student as her boyfriend, and her college disciplined her for breaking rules which were not enforced about chaperones when you met a boy. And they did that because they disapproved not of her having a boyfriend, they disapproved of her having an Indian boyfriend. She married in Oxford in 1933, and from that moment decided she was Indian, wore Indian-style clothes, even though it was another year before she first set foot on Indian soil. She and her husband, BPL Bedi, who was a Punjabi Sikh, lived in Lahore. They were very prominent leftists. They were nationalists. They were journalists. She wrote about women's issues at a time, for daily papers, at a time when that was quite rare. And they were part of a glittering set of Bohemian Lahori leftists. During the Second World War, her husband was interned as a communist because he was trying to stop Punjabis joining the British Indian Army. So she offered herself for arrest as a satyagrahi, a follower of Gandhi. She was the only European woman in that stage of Gandhi's protests, and she spent 3 months in Lahore Women's Jail, which she writes about with a very tellingly, not least because she got to know not just the political prisoners, she got to know the criminal prisoners there, almost all of whom were in for killing their husbands. And the general wisdom in the jail was actually better to be in jail than have a cruel, vindictive husband. She covered the Bengal famine for the Tribune. After partition, the family moved to Kashmir, and both were very active and influential alongside Sheikh Abdullah as leftists within Kashmiri nationalism. They spent 5 years there and then moved to Delhi. And Frida then had a spiritual turn. She was always quite spiritual in aspects of her life, but she discovered Buddhism, and then she was a great networker. She got her friend Nehru to send her to Assam, where the camps had been set up for those Tibetan refugees who followed the Dalai Lama across the mountains. And she became a Tibetan Buddhist, working with those refugees, and eventually a Tibetan Buddhist nun, when for women, Western women, to get involved in Eastern spirituality was very rare. So that's just a taster for who Frida Bedi was.
Well, thank you so much, Andrew. And well, you should really have not only a taste of it, but really read it. It's a fascinating piece of history, and we'll come back later on about how is it that we ignored the role played by such a character in the history of the country. Now we move to Irène's latest book, Je te suivrai en Sibérie. I'll follow you up in Siberia, and we'll see that a century earlier, a little bit more than that, we may find some similarities with the hero of that book. Pauline, the heroine of I'll Follow You Up in Siberia.
Yes, je vais parler en français.
Yeah, I will translate Irène's answer.
Pauline est une jeune Française de, on va dire, 1820, et elle travaille dans la haute couture à Paris.
So Pauline is a young French woman working in fashion in Paris in the 1820s.
Et c'est une condition très dure. Ce n'est pas aussi joli que laisse entendre le mot haute couture.
It's absolutely not glamorous. It's a very tough job, and they're fairly exploited.
Et il y a toujours un soupçon sur les vendeuses de mode, qu'elles soient des courtisanes ou des prostituées.
And they are, considered almost as, courtesans or prostitutes.
Et c'est sa mère qui l'a obligée à travailler pour lui rapporter beaucoup d'argent.
So she was forced to actually take up this job to send money back home.
Et un jour, elle en a complètement assez et elle accepte une offre très aventureuse qui est de devenir vendeuse de mode à Moscou dans le plus grand magasin de mode français.
So one day she got fed up and she just moved to Russia. She accepted an offer by the top shop in Moscow, the top fashion shop. And at that time, I'm just adding to what Irène has just said, the Russian elite is one of the first consumer of luxury goods.
Et Pauline, dès son enfance, a toujours aimé le risque. Quand elle avait 14-15 ans, elle escaladait les murs, elle montait sur les toits et les clochers des églises.
So she was always a risk-loving personality. Like when she was 14, 15 years old, she would climb on roofs, she would jump, she would do like what has become a fashion now in certain countries, those jumping from one roof to another, from one balcony to another.
Je précise que cette histoire est absolument vraie et je l'ai découverte dans ses mémoires à Saint-Pétersbourg.
So it's a true story based on her own account that she found in St. Petersburg.
Et donc, à Moscou, un jeune aristocrate russe, très riche et très intelligent, devient fou amoureux d'elle et finalement, elle devient sa maîtresse.
So in Moscow, a very rich and very bright Russian prince fell madly in love with her.
Elle refuse le mariage parce qu'elle sait qu'elle ne sera pas acceptée par l'élite russe.
So she refused the offer. She doesn't want to get married to him because she knows that she will be rejected by the elite society.
Elle devient enceinte et à peu près à ce moment-là, elle découvre que son amant est dans une société secrète, une des innombrables sociétés secrètes qui projette d'assassiner le tsar Nicolas Ier.
So she becomes pregnant, and in the meanwhile, she discovered that her husband was part of a secret society which was hatching a conspiracy against the new Tsar, Nicholas I.
Et la conspiration aboutit à une insurrection le 14 décembre 1825. C'est une date essentielle de l'histoire russe.
So on 14th December 1825, there is an actual conspiracy in order to overthrow Nicholas I, and that has become a very important date in the history of Russia.
En quelques heures, l'insurrection est un échec. Il y a 2000 morts et tous les aristocrates sont envoyés en forteresse.
The conspiracy failed totally. 2,000 people were killed during the repressions, and the princes were sent to a camp in Siberia.
Et Pauline réussit à entrer dans la forteresse à de nombreuses reprises, à voir son amant, et il est condamné à la Sibérie avec 120 autres, et elle lui promet « Je te suivrai en Sibérie », et elle le fait.
Sorry, I took a shortcut. Before being sent to Siberia, he's being sent to a fortress where she managed to enter and to see him, and then he's sent to Siberia. And she said, I'll follow you in Siberia. I'll follow you in Siberia, sorry.
Et elle le fait, et 7 autres femmes russes, mais des aristocrates très riches, vont faire comme elle, et elles vont rejoindre la Sibérie extrême et trouver la prison, et à ce moment-là, décider de redonner le courage et force à leurs amants révolutionnaires.
Along with 7 other women from very, very elite society, very rich aristocrat women. Well, they go separately though, but they end up being 8 of them, joining their husband, I mean not yet husband in the case of Pauline, in Siberia in order to try to help them to survive.
Elles laissent leurs enfants derrière eux parce qu'elles n'ont pas le droit de les emmener.
So they leave the kids behind because they're not allowed to take them along.
Elles vont réussir à donner tellement de courage à leur mari qu'ils fondent une république à la française en prison, en appliquant les principes liberté, égalité, fraternité, des élections pour désigner un chef, etc. Et leur chant de guerre est la Marseillaise.
So they manage not only to give some hope to their husbands, but they recreate a kind of a small republic over there in Siberia, founded on democratic principles, because that's what had inspired their conspiracy in the first place, to overthrow the kind of servage, the feudal system, which was then enforced. And so they really create a small republic based on the ideals of French Revolution, and the song of that republic becomes the French national song, La Marseillaise.
Et donc, ce groupe va rester une trentaine d'années en Sibérie et va tellement impressionner les gens que ça va être le début de la civilisation de la Sibérie. qui vont fonder des écoles, des orphelinats, ils vont appliquer des principes d'agronomie, que ça va être, tout le monde va être fasciné par eux, et les femmes vont devenir des héroïnes même en Russie.
So it's going to be a big, I mean, that's going to be the beginning of a major change in Siberia, because from their 30 years span in Siberia, there's going to be new schools being set up, new agronomical kind of principle being spread. So that's going to be remembered as a kind of a major turn in the history of Siberia and of Russia.
Donc j'ai été fascinée par ce destin. Je suis allée sur les traces de Pauline jusqu'en extrême Sibérie. J'ai étudié les archives. J'ai reconstitué ce destin mythique en Russie, puisqu'elle a des statues, des chansons et même 2 films.
So Irène, when following Pauline's footsteps in Siberia, where she discovered that she had some actually monuments dedicated to her, where 2 movies have been shot around her life. Now, maybe we'll have as a kind of a second question for both of you. In both your work, a very important aspect is to rediscover some women's characters whose role in history have been really underplayed in the main narrative. It's true for Pauline, who was absolutely known in France, but for Poulan Devi, and when you started working on her, and of course for Freda Bedi and so many other. So many, and now Andrew, maybe what's your take on that? How is it that Freda's life has been fairly ignored? I mean, we know Kabir Bedi, all of us, but not the mother, and maybe with all the respect to Kabir, Freda was a larger character than him when it comes to the history of India.
Kabir was very close to his mother, closer to his mother than his father, and he's very proud of his mother and actually wants to make a film about his mother. You know, Frida in some ways was a proto-feminist. She deliberately expanded the sphere for women. When she taught at a women's college in Lahore, she encouraged her students to think about jobs in areas such as journalism, which were not then areas where women worked. Yet, she was in many ways subservient to her husband. She followed him to India. It wasn't him staying in her country of England. She thought it very important to be a dutiful wife and indeed daughter-in-law. She touched her mother-in-law's feet when she first met her in Kapurthala. She became part of a religion, Tibetan Buddhism, which is deeply, deeply patriarchal. Though one of the things she did was promote the interests of Tibetan nuns, who are often overlooked within that tradition. But I think one of the things is, because she wasn't a political leader, because she wasn't a founder of great institutions, because she was a facilitator in many ways, which was often what women did, particularly she died in 1977, so her adult period was from the early 30s to the late 70s. It tends to be taken for granted, it tends to be a little bit overlooked, it tends to be in the footnotes. And I think the story is, first of all, it's important. Secondly, it is just hugely interesting that a woman had such a range of activities in her life. And I think in some ways, her life still speaks to us directly today.
Thank you, Andrew. And what about you, Irène? Do you agree with that statement that many of the women who played an important role in history, whom you came across, whom you wrote about, their role has been fairly underplayed in the main narrative? For instance, Pauline is known in Roland Dumas. Pauline has been the hero of one of Roland Dumas, but in a totally different manner.
Yes, I do agree. Je suis tout à fait d'accord. Mais je pense aussi que maintenant que les hommes sont beaucoup plus conscients du rôle que les femmes jouent dans l'histoire et que d'autre part, beaucoup de femmes écrivent qui sont bien entendu plus sensibles à la condition féminine, ces personnages qu'on a laissés dans l'ombre ressurgissent avec encore plus de force.
So Irène agrees with that statement, but she feels that more and more men are becoming aware of that, the importance of the role of women in history, and also more and more women are becoming authors and are obviously more sensitive to that particular contribution to world history. So she feels that we are actually now in a phase of rediscovery of the role of women in history, and that it's coming back with far more strength.
Et d'autre part, la société n'arrête pas de changer et on admet, malgré toutes les difficultés, le rôle des femmes dans la société contemporaine. Les femmes sont de plus en plus impliquées par leur action, par leur travail, par également leurs idées dans la société contemporaine. Donc aussi, on entend mieux ces messages qui viennent de l'histoire des femmes.
So yeah, since women are playing a more and more important role in all the sectors of society, we get to hear more and more about that actual contribution.
Et aussi bien les hommes que les femmes.
Yeah, we are hearing from both.
Parce que j'ai beaucoup de lecteurs masculins, ça veut dire qu'ils s'interrogent beaucoup sur le rôle des femmes.
So she has a huge a male readership as well, which means that there is a questioning happening among male as well. Now, both of you, how do you assess the importance of such barrier-breaking attitude, tendency, or the need to go beyond the barriers which you have been addressing in your work, both of you? Andrew, how is it relevant to today?
There's a rise in identity politics. It's evident in my country, it's evident here, it's evident in many parts of the world. You can see the reasons for that. You can also see the consequences of it. I think the thing that most grabbed me when I was researching and telling Frida Beatty's life is the way that she was determined to challenge and confound those barriers which gender, race, religion, and nationality sometimes pose. And each time she reinvented herself, when she got to Oxford, when she moved to Lahore, when she became a Buddhist, when she became a nun, it wasn't a rejection of her past. It was a new turn, and she took her past with her. So as a Buddhist nun, she wore maroon robes and shaved her hair. But she was still in touch with her best friend at Oxford, who was a woman called Barbara Castle, who was the most powerful woman British politician of her era. And Barbara Castle invited her to lunch at the House of Commons. So there was Frida, as Sister Palmo, a Buddhist nun, in the maroon robes, with an Indian passport, shaved head, going to have lunch in the House of Commons. Of course she turned heads. She liked the attention of being the one who was out of step. There's no two ways about that. But she was determined that she would not be constrained by simple labels. And I think that's something that can be, something at least that we bear in mind in our lives and our political loyalties today.
Thanks, Andrew. I think breaking barriers has played an important role not only in the lives of your characters, but maybe in your own life, Irène.
Oui, ça a joué un grand rôle parce que je venais d'un milieu très pauvre et que j'étais censée faire des études pour enseigner, ce que j'ai fait. Et ma famille n'a pas vu d'un bon œil que j'écrive. C'était comme si j'étais devenue, il disait, une saltimbanque. Mais je crois qu'une femme, pour briser les barrières, elle ne doit pas simplement être spectaculaire. Elle doit d'abord être tenace. C'est tous les jours que la liberté des femmes se construit avec constance, patience et ténacité.
So yes, breaking barrier has been very much part of my life since I'm coming from a family which was underprivileged, and I was meant to study only to become a teacher. And my family didn't take it very nicely when I started writing. They thought I was becoming a kind of a gypsy. So when it comes to women, breaking barrier is a daily job, which requires a tremendous tenacity.
Et ce qui est important, c'est d'être, pour une femme spécialement, c'est valable aussi pour un homme, mais d'être fidèle à ce qu'elle à ce qu'elle est depuis l'enfance. Moi, j'étais pas d'accord de devenir comme ma mère, d'être asservie aux tâches domestiques, à être une sorte de bête de somme ménagère. Et je ne voulais pas devenir cette femme. Et j'ai tout fait pour ne pas devenir cette femme. Mais quand j'ai eu des étudiants, ou quand je parle avec mes lectrices ou les étudiants, je dis aux filles, osez être ce que vous êtes. Ayez confiance en vous. Les filles ont le droit d'avoir confiance, mais c'est la confiance en soi pour les filles, pour les femmes, qui fait qu'elles peuvent briser les barrières.
It's very important for women as well as for men, actually, to keep that part of childhood alive and to be faithful to that childhood part of us. And as a young girl, Irène was saying that she didn't want to become like her mother. She didn't want to become a household woman. She didn't want to become the kind of household hero, that unknown hero, anonymous hero that women are expected to be. So it's very important to keep these ideals that as a woman one can do it. One can fulfill her own own destiny, and that's something which is very crucial. Women have to be self-confident and to move ahead. Before we take questions, so I would just like to go beyond the gender issue, Irène Frain, and also for you, Andrew, how to yourself in your own lives to move away from. I mean, you came here, you married here, you traveled a lot, you went through many adventurous investigation to write your book. How was this important for both of you? This barrier breaking, how has it been important in building your own, fulfilling your own destiny, building your own personality?
Je l'ai fait en écrivant des livres et j'espère que les lectrices et les lecteurs, en s'identifiant au personnage, peuvent se dire « moi aussi je peux le faire, je peux avoir confiance en moi et vivre ma liberté dans la dignité ».
So I did break barrier by writing books, and my aim is that the readership, and particularly women, but not only, can fulfill, I mean, can be inspired by those characters and break those barriers in order to achieve their own freedom. That's as I did by becoming a writer. Andrew.
But what's it's important is dignity. What is important is dignity.
Dignity, yes.
Dignité. Recouvrer, être respecté par les hommes et ainsi pouvoir vivre en harmonie, et que les deux sexes puissent vivre en harmonie.
Yeah, what is important is dignity, is to recover a pride so that both genders can live in harmony. Andrew, what about you? How is barrier breaking, which is not always easy in the job of a journalist, but how did it help you to become yourself and fulfill maybe your ideals?
I first became aware of Frida when I was working in Kashmir. I was actually working on the history of Kashmir, and I was talking to people who'd been active there in 1947-48, and I came across women who talked about this English woman who was part of their cause, who picked up a rifle. She never used the rifle, but she was trained to use the rifle in a left-wing women's militia supporting Sheikh Abdullah. And as I found out more about Frida, the analogies of my own life captured my attention. She went to a northern English grammar school, yeah. She went to Oxford, yeah. She married an Indian, yeah. She was involved in left-wing politics, yeah. sort of. She was engaged with Kashmir, yeah. She brought up her family in Delhi, yeah. You can take that so far, of course. There's lots of differences, generation, gender. I'm not a Buddhist. But those analogies caught my interest and encouraged me to dig further. They were my hook into her life.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, one cannot, help thinking about quite few destiny in India, like Vera Elwin, of course, also went to Oxford and kind of becomes maybe another personality by living in India. Dagmar Bernstoff, who was in Hyderabad in the 60s, and others. Now it's time for the audience to ask questions. We have a little bit less than 10 minutes left if we want to keep on time. Yes.
No, just because I know Frida Bedi.
Can you please?
I know Frida Bedi very well, interacted with her entire family. Don't you think she was one of the British woman who was fighting for India's freedom also?
I'm very keen to talk to you afterwards. So this woman in the front row, I don't know if you all heard, she knew Frida, and she was saying, don't you think she was one of the British women who was fighting for India's freedom? Yes, I do. She went to jail in support of Indian nationalism against a country which happened to be her mother country. She made clear she was on India's side, not England's side. As a student at Oxford, she heard Tagore, Radhakrishnan, Gandhi. They all came. I mean, it's amazing as a student, to think that in Oxford she could have heard all those people speak directly. She emerged from university, as did her husband, who actually went to Oxford to do the Indian civil service exams, came back a communist, with a deep loathing of imperialism, and particularly the way that imperialism was policed and the indignities that it imposed on the people who were at the sharp end. And one of the first ways in which she expressed herself politically in Lahore is she became the provincial organizer of the Civil Liberties Union. So she was an activist, and her husband was an apparatchik. He liked being a communist. She was much more, her politics were based on ethics and a sense of justice, much more than ideology. But I absolutely agree with you, yes. She was a British woman who championed India's claim to nationhood.
Before we take a second and last question, you, Irène, what role did play India in also breaking barriers and becoming yourself?
Oui, tout simplement, quand la première fois je suis arrivée en Inde, j'étais un professeur, j'enseignais le latin à la Sorbonne, j'étais persuadée que j'allais faire une carrière d'universitaire avec une thèse. Et en arrivant, pour mon premier voyage en Inde, sur les traces d'un de mes héros, c'est mon premier roman, j'ai découvert que je n'étais pas une universitaire, que j'étais quelqu'un qui était faite pour raconter des histoires, pour raconter des fictions, emporter les gens dans des grands destins. Et je suis très, très reconnaissante à l'Inde de m'avoir révélé qui j'étais.
So when I came first to India, I was a teacher, professor in Sorbonne. I was teaching Latin language, and I thought that, well, that's my job. I'm going to be a scholar. And that's only after coming to India that I discovered that my actually real vocation was to build up narratives, to take the readers across, uncommon destinies.
Your son, Kabir Bedi, great actor. Your land, Kashmir, and Lahore. Now and then, what do you see now? Draw a line between them. Advice to Mr. Bedi, Kabir Bedi, and what are feelings about the Kashmir and Lahore now and then?
C'est une question sur le Cachemire.
Andrew, maybe we can have the second one and then we can...
My question is to Mr. Andrew. I have read about Freda, her contribution that you spoke about in the leftist cause and other socialist cause during the times of Sheikh Abdullah. And your book also speaks about her entire journey and many trajectories that she took. And she did not leave her past behind, but actually took it along and had the courage to challenge herself in those times. So do you think that given the situation that Kashmir is right now, with 3 former chief ministers behind the bars, do you think that we can find Freda Bedis in India who will champion the cause of Kashmir?
Okay. Kabir Bedi was born in Lahore in January 1946. He's a child of Lahore. In a sense, he's a child of partition. Kabir's political views these days, I think, are fairly well known. And I got on very well with him, largely by avoiding talking about politics today and talking about his mother. And he was very helpful to me. And I'm not going to say anything more about Kabir and his political loyalties. As for Gohra's question about Kashmir, it's complex. So Freda Bedi picked up a gun in Kashmir and was part of a militia. Was part of a militia that was fighting for Kashmir's freedom. But at that stage, Kashmir's freedom was seen as, first of all, against the Maharaja, and secondly, against a tribal army which came with the support of the Pakistan authorities. So actually, she was picking up a gun very crudely, on India's side. Sheikh Abdullah was on India's side in the early 1950s. How would she feel about things now? I don't know, but I think she'd be fairly agonized, and we're going to hear much more later on this afternoon about the situation in Kashmir. Are there Freda Bedis now? It's a difficult analogy, but are there people of both genders in India who have a deep concern for Kashmir and want a better future for Kashmir than it's had a past? I think there are. I remain... it's very hard sometimes when you're talking about Kashmir to be an optimist, but I try very hard to remain an optimist.
A last question by fellow writer Vikram Kapoor.
Thank you. Andrew, just what was the research process like for this book? You could talk a little bit about that.
First of all, because Freda died in 1977, when I started working on her, first thing was to talk to as many people as possible who knew her. And I managed to find people who knew her from her Lahore days in the mid-1940s. I talked to a lot of people in Kashmir who remember her as an activist there. I talked to a lot of Tibetan lamas who she helped to educate and who she worked with. The family have got quite a good family archive, better than you would expect. And they collected the letters that Freda sent, as well as the ones that Freda received. So that's a bonus that you don't normally have. Then there's the work in archives. It's sometimes hugely Pyrrhic. You spend 3 days in an archive and you get very excited because you found one letter which mentions Freda. And you think, it's a footnote. But nevertheless, you've got something extra. And then she worked as a journalist. And journalists know that actually you've got to knock on every door. And if you don't knock on every door, you've got to start gently kicking the doors to try and get information. So she worked as a journalist for the Tribune, which was the daily nationalist paper in Lahore. It moved after partition to Chandigarh. There are no copies of the Tribune from its Lahore days in any British library. I assumed that they'd been destroyed in partition. But I got in touch with the editor of the Tribune in Chandigarh and said, do you have copies from your Lahore days? And he, to my immense surprise, said, yes, we have a complete set, and we have just digitized our holdings. So I was able to send a researcher from Delhi who in 3 days came back with, on a pen drive, 300 articles either by or about Freda Bedi. So that was an amazing, it's a stroke of luck, but that allowed me to tell the story of her time in Lahore and to some extent her time in Kashmir as well, with a richness that you couldn't do otherwise. Plus, winning the trust of the family. So the first time I met Kabir in London, as I was leaving, he said, oh, and you've heard the tapes, haven't you? Well, he knew I hadn't heard the tapes. So Kabir's mother, towards the end of her life, recorded some tapes about her life story, about 4 hours of cassette tapes, for her grandchildren. And this was an elderly nun at the end of her life telling a slightly rose-tinted version of her story. But it's 4 hours, and lots of it is just gold dust. How she felt as a student, how she first met her husband, what she felt about the college authorities disciplining her, lots of anecdote. And the family allowed me access. It's not a commissioned biography. I chose the subject. But they allowed me access to all their material without any restrictions. They didn't ask to read the book before publication, which is a great, act of faith on their part. But all of those things, contributed to telling a life. And I haven't told a saint's life. This is not a woman without fault. She had plenty of faults. And there's lots to admire in her life, but I've made sure that I try and tell a life with the grit in it, with the difficult bits not disguised as well.